everybody, and welcome back to Flock Talk. Today we are going to be diving deep into the tiny little details of this bird room and explaining how you could make a bird-safe environment. Parrots are extremely sensitive animals when it comes to household cleaners, different types of woods, the metals that you use. Every tiny little detail counts when it comes to creating a room or a household or any sort of environment that is going to be safe for them to fully explore. When creating designated cage spaces, aviaries, or rooms like this, we need to take into account that birds will explore absolutely every little detail of it, both with their beaks, with their wings, and everything else. We have to ensure that everything that we use in these rooms is going to be safe for them to be mouthing and climbing and chewing on, otherwise the room isn't really going to be totally safe. So how exactly do you create a bird-safe room? We're going to be addressing that today. The first thing you should think about is what exactly the room is going to be used for. Is this a place that your birds are going to be out and about for the entire day? Is this somewhere they're going to be left unsupervised? Are you trying to create an aviary environment where they can just live in this space instead of a cage? Or is this a temporary space where the birds can hang out and explore while supervised? All of those things kind of indicate what sort of things you could be using in your room and which sort of things you shouldn't. When it came to my bird room, I had the drywall walls, the doorknobs on there, and the ceiling fan that was made of some sort of varnished wood. Obviously would not be safe for the birds to interact with, so it was easiest just to kind of cover up or replace the things that I could. I switched out the ceiling fan for one that was made of bird-safe materials and made sure that the bulbs that were in it were not going to emit any fumes that would be harmful to them. Replaced the hardware for the doorknobs and things that the birds might be chewing on, any sort of screws and bits or hooks that were in the walls, making sure that those were removed, and I moved on to the walls. For my bird room here, this is a space that the birds can only be in when somebody is home. Because I do have two different birds, and Newt is obviously significantly bigger than Mia, they are different species, there is a very high risk for them to fight if they were to be left unattended in a large space or an enclosed one. So for my particular birds, the space that I use here is something that they only are out and about together in if there is somebody there to break up any potential fights or squabbles or things that could go wrong. So for me, I have designated cage spaces that the birds go into if someone isn't there to supervise them, and I have the room where they can be out and about if somebody is home to prevent any mishaps. If this was going to be a replacement for a cage, I would be putting about a good inch and a half of cage bars or something that is safe for birds to be chewing on away from the actual wall. Because drywall will not be safe for your birds to chew on, and most woods or panels that you're going to be putting on there will have been treated, it is not safe for your bird to be left alone with a hunk of wood that they're going to be digging their beaks into. If you don't think your birds are going to, you are very lucky, because most parrots will go ahead and chew and munch on anything they feel like, and that includes your windowsills, your walls, and your floors. So if you are going to create a space that you want your birds to be able to be out in constantly, I would make sure that you are putting something ahead of your walls that stops your bird from actually being able to reach and munch on your drywall. For my bird room, I did put on slick wood paneling. That way there's no edges or grooves for the birds to get their beaks on. It is one smooth, flat panel, so it is very unlikely that they're going to be able to get their beaks on it and be able to actually chew it. Again, this is a space that the birds aren't going to be left unattended in, so I don't need to have that extra safe barrier to make sure they aren't going to chew it. The floor we did the same thing with as well. They are very large, slick, flat panels. They are not very easy for them to get an edge on to be able to chew, and we sealed each edge with silicone so that way the birds cannot really get their beaks between the grooves and chew on anything they shouldn't be. What materials you use for this is entirely up to you and what sort of things you have available. If you are creating an indoor aviary sort of feel, you can buy large panels, you can use chicken wire. As long as it is not galvanized metal and it is not heavy metal, you can use just about anything you want to create that sort of ginormous cage feel. For actual wood paneling, you just need to find some plain old pieces of wood that you know exactly what they're made of. There aren't a lot of adhesives in them. Something that if a bird were to accidentally swallow a piece isn't going to cause major harm. you could use just plain big birchwood panels and that would do just fine. The last little detail I added for the walls was these PVC sort of corner protectors. Now because I used big wood panels, where those two panels meet, there is going to be an edge. And my birds notice every tiny little detail. They will find these little edges and they'll start picking at them and chewing at them until they fully pry it off the wall or chunk hunks of woods out. So I decided to be a little proactive about this and I grabbed some little PVC corner pieces and I just put them into the wall and screwed them in place. Now there is a plastic chunk that the birds can kind of pull at. They're not very likely to actually be able to break it, but if they do, those pieces are much, much cheaper and much, much easier for me to replace than the entire wood panel. I have a few different electronics in the bird room. I have a humidifier, I have an air filter, we have Newt's powered fountain bathtub, and we have a UV light. All of those things will have electrical cables, and obviously it's not going to be safe if the birds were to chew on them. Again, if you think your bird won't sit there one day and suddenly decide to go and check out an electrical wire, you are extremely lucky to have a bird that is not so exceptionally curious that they're going to go and chew on them. Birds explore with their beaks. If they see something they're unfamiliar with, they're very, very likely to go and give it a munch, and obviously with an electrical wire, that is not going to be safe. Now, because my room is intended to be used under supervision only, I do not worry too much about electrical wires that are there because the birds aren't left alone for so long that would be a major risk for them. If you were planning on having things like this in an environment that the bird is going to be left alone in, I would use things like hard or soft PVC tubing to put around the cable to stop them from being able to access the cord. This way, if the bird does happen to start chewing on it, it's very easy for you to see that they are. There's a huge barrier between them and the electrical cable, and you can try and find an alternative method to kind of hide the cables, put them behind bars or something that the birds cannot be able to access. Really, those are the big main things to consider when it comes to safety in a bird room. There's not many other things they're really going to get into. If you have safe walls, if you have safe electronics, you're pretty much set aside from what things you're going to be adding into your room for the birds to have fun with. I had so much fun setting up my bird room, going out to different hardware stores or bird supply stores and seeing all of the neat things and coming up with vast ideas of what I could do to create a space for them. So while what I've done with my room is great, absolutely strike inspiration from everything around you. You can go to dollar stores and hardware stores and find all sorts of unique different tools and things that you might be able to modify to be used for your birds. There's all sorts of really wacky, crazy, fun ideas you can come up with. There's all sorts of forums and websites that give you more ideas. There's so much that you can do with a bird room when it comes to setting up a whole space for them. So I would definitely recommend digging in deep and coming up with a lot of great ideas yourself, because it can be so much fun to do that for them. For me, I stuck with my space being mostly one that they could fly in. I didn't worry too much about floor standing play gyms, and instead I went with the ropes that are on my ceiling. Now these ropes are unoiled sisal, and that is extremely important. There's all sorts of different types of rope that you can use, but the most important thing is that you must find ones that are unoiled. Generally through the manufacturing process, ropes will have been oiled so that way they can slide through those machines a lot easier. And if your bird were to chew and munch on those, or they walk on it and then preen their feet and they end up ingesting those oils, that is not going to be safe for them. Attaching the ropes was really quite easy because I have smaller birds. If you have ones that are significantly larger, there are other methods you will have to use to attach them to make sure they can support your bird's weight. But for me, all I had to do was use a stud finder along the wall to locate a good solid stud, which is just a large beam in your wall that holds a lot of support, has a lot more strength. If I were to just drill a hole anywhere in the wall without checking for that, I would be drilling just straight into plain drywall, which is only about like a 1/4 inch thick and is not going to be able to support very much weight with all of these toys and things hanging off of my ropes. So finding a stud is quite important if you're going to be hanging things off of it. If you were just hanging one rope back and forth and the only thing you're having is a 28-gram bird legging on it, you will do just fine with a drywall anchor and a regular hook. It's not going to have too many issues. Because of how much weight I want mine to support, I had to go find a stud and use a good, strong, sturdy hook. Of course, the hooks that I use in the bird room, any sort of screws and materials, are stainless steel. There are a couple different types of metals that you can use with birds. I would make sure to go look up a bird safe list. I'll leave one down in the description below for different metals and hardware types and bits of screws that you can be using. You do not want to be using anything that is consistent of heavy metals because those will be toxic if your bird were to decide to beak on them and get some little filaments inside their mouths. That was really all it took to put the ropes on the walls. All I did was screw the hook in through the stud and just threaded the rope through and tied it off at a knot. I didn't do anything other than that. I didn't really need to, and it does the job and has been holding up fantastically for about 2 years now, so I'd say it's doing a pretty good job. One additional detail I did add to the ropes was this little cardboard disc. I just cut some out of a cereal box and am using it to protect the wall. Because where I have screwed through, there's going to be an edge for the birds to be able to grab with their beaks and grip. I don't want them chewing up these walls if they don't need to be, so I'm just using that cardboard disc to act as a barrier to stop the birds from being able to easily reach, access, and chew on the walls. The next detail I added for my birds was all of these wall perches. This was something I added a little later after I'd already set up the room, but I've always really wanted it. It's always been a little bit of a dream for mine, so it's something I added to mine, and my birds do use it. The sun from the window comes through and lands right on this wall, so they like to actually hang out here quite a bit, which I'm really happy about because I wasn't sure if they would use them all that much initially, because it is right against the wall and it's not quite as high as the ropes, but they do use them, so I am really happy that I added them. These perches were done basically the same way as the ropes, except I didn't really worry about finding studs. Because it's just a lightweight perch, it's not supporting a whole lot, I don't have heavy birds, I didn't find it necessary. If you do have a heavy bird or you're using a really big Java branch or something, you will find it more beneficial to go and locate a stud in your wall first. For these guys, all I did was drill my hole and then just take the screw that's already manufactured into these perches and just twisting it in until it landed in place and was nice and secure and wasn't gonna move. And I just kept the stainless steel washers that come with the perches against there for the same reason that we did the ropes, so the birds can't be chewing at the hole that I drilled and chewing up the wall or getting anything ingested they shouldn't be. The last main detail I included in my birds' room was their cages. Because this is a space that the birds are only out to be supervised in, they still needed somewhere to be closed in at night or when people go to work, so they could be safe and separate and not be fighting over anything, potentially hurting one another when we're not there to supervise. I decided to go just a little bit extra with this. I could absolutely have just left my cages floor standing. Mine was a big double-decker system. I just had it standing in the corner for the first while. If you have a smaller cage, you can just as easily leave it sitting on a stand or on a dresser or whatever, and that will work just fine. I went a little bit above and beyond with mine, and I actually wall mounted my cages. Quite honestly, there's no major reason as to why I did this. I really just liked the look of it, and it was something I really wanted to do, so I did it. I do find it beneficial though because the cages are as high as they can possibly be and the birds are on the same level. So I'm not having one on the bottom, one on the top, and one getting a lot more shade and the other one getting a lot more sun. There's many different ways to wall mount something, and I by no means did it the most effective way possible. How you would do it does depend very much on the type of cage that you have. Because mine is entirely metal all the way around and it doesn't have a big plastic bottom, and it's big and square and easy, all I did was kind of use these braces that you would use to hold up a shelf, and I used those to hold up the cages, and then I just took some screws and washers and screwed through the bars of the cage to secure it firmly to the wall, so it's not going to tip, it's not going to wiggle, and then everything's nice and secure and sturdy. If you do decide to do this, of course make sure that any braces or mounts or screws or washers, whatever you use, are made of bird-safe metals. Make sure that you double check that they aren't plated, because if that's sitting in your bird's cage and they're left unattended with it, it could be quite harmful for them. So just make sure that the metals that you're using are something that's going to be safe for them to be chewing on. Another thing to consider about your bird's room is where you're going to keep their extra supplies, their food, their excess toy parts, and things you use for rotation. Whatever containers you use to hold these things either need to be something that the bird cannot get into or need to be outside of your bird's reach. For my room, I like to keep things as easily accessible as possible. This way I can rotate toys out really quickly, I can grab their food as fast as I need to, but things that I don't use quite as often, like travel carriers or emergency supplies, I keep inside the closet that is just sitting behind me here. Anything that I need quite regularly will be out somewhere in the room where it is easily accessible. For the birds' food and treats, I keep them up on the wall behind me here in glass jars. I use glass because it is clean, easy to maintain, not very porous, so it's not going to develop a lot of bacteria, and it is heavy enough where the birds are not going to be able to pick it up, drop it, or throw it around, while being secure enough that my birds can't get the lids off and go and gorge on all the treats in the world. How they were mounted onto the wall is not super duper complicated. All I did was find some stainless steel baskets and use washers and screws to hook them on. I could also have used hooks, I could use different mounts. I just decided to go with screws and washers because I had a ton of them left over from everything else we were mounting and setting up in the room. It just seemed like the easiest option for me. For everything else, all their extra toy parts, I keep those just in fabric totes, the little cube stands that you can find at IKEA, and I just utilize those to have one for all of the books and reading and educational stuff, one for toy parts that have been used and reused and are kind of damaged, and the other one for new toy parts or things that have already been separated and cleaned. And the final empty cube is just for the bags of food. If this was a room that the birds are being left unattended in for extensive periods of time and they're going to go in and get into everything, I would not be using this piece of furniture. Obviously, this is painted black. There is stuff on it. It is not going to be safe for the birds to be chewing and picking at. If this was a bird room to be used unattended, I would probably keep all of these things in a sealed separate room in the closet or something that is not treated wood and just plain untreated furniture. That would work just as well. Final little notes for things to be wary of in a bird's room would be the location and age of your house. If your bird room has vents in it, double check that either they are closed or you know that your heater is not emitting anything that's harmful to them. If you do have heat vents or air conditioning and things like that in your house, make sure that they're clean, make sure it's not blowing dust right up into your bird's space. They are very, very sensitive to airborne particles, and that can be quite harmful. Same goes for vents that might be connected to different rooms. You don't want any fumes from your kitchen coming into the bird's room and causing damage that way. Because of this, do also be wary if your bird's room is close to any sort of cleaning chemicals or anything like that that could be emitting. No candles, no perfumes, no sort of scented products whatsoever that could potentially be getting into their room. If you want this to be their bird's safe space where nothing can really harm them, make sure that there are no vents, they're not sitting right outside a bathroom. Make sure that all those little details are in place, because you don't want any fumes kind of seeping through the door and accidentally harming your birds. A bird's room should be a well-ventilated space. If you do have windows, I would recommend finding some of those window screens so that way you can crack open the window when the seasons are warm and you can have it venting out very nicely and getting good regular ventilation. Having an air purifier is something I consider an absolute need when you have a bird room or you have a bird at all, not only for the health and safety of the bird, but for you as well. It is very, very common for people to get what is called bird keeper's lung or bird fancier's lung, where you have basically breathed in too much bird dust, debris, poop particles, and everything else, and it is inflaming and damaging your lungs. So having an air purifier not only helps them from any harmful chemicals and things that could be floating around in your air, but it also protects you from excessively breathing in their dust as well. Those are really the main aspects I would consider for creating a bird safe or just bird-specific room. This was by no means an extensive list of all household hazards. This was just things to consider in a bird-specific room, things that they might need to come into contact with, and things like that. There are tons of things that can harm parrots. There are enormous numbers of things that are harmful that are just in every single day lives and households, and you use them every aspect of your day without thinking twice about it. So that is not what this video was at all today. This is just things to consider when it comes to assembling a bird-specific room. But that will do it for today. I think that just about covers kind of the bare minimum things that I really think about when it comes to setting up a room. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you all next time. Bye.